Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my December 2024 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything, although I try to avoid spoilers, or if you need to go back to anything, you can do that. All of that is down below. On the way down to check that out, make sure that you're subscribed, because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe people for absolutely no reason. Maybe hit the like button, maybe share this with a friend. You do you. As a reminder, at the end I will also be updating how I did on my bookish bingo board from hell for 2024, as well as talking about what I did for the Queer Lit Readathon. So be sure to stay tuned for that. In December, I read 19 things for a total of 5,488 pages. That's taking into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so about 1,270 of those pages were actually about 39 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 13 adult books, 5 YA books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 12 novels, 3 graphic novels, 3 anthologies, and 1 novella. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was mystery, thriller, and contemporary, followed by nonfiction, fantasy, science fiction, romance, horror, and poetry. If you adjust by page count, not too much changes. Most of these books were from the library, but I also read some from NetGalley, Book of the Month, a publisher, a friend, and Kindle. I read 6 ebooks, 5 paperbacks, 4 audiobooks, and 4 hardcovers. The biggest chunk of my reading was in the 300 to 399 page range, and most of these were published this decade. Over half of these books were by female authors, and over half the protagonists were female. In terms of setting, under half were set in the US, but I also had reads set in the UK, Canada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ireland, Japan, Australia, and other worlds. In terms of diversity of subject matter, nearly half were intersectional, many queer, translated, or dealing with mental health, but a chunk had no discernible diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 2.5 star read, 3 3-star reads, 2 3.5 star reads, 6 4-star reads, 4 4.5 star reads, and 3 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My 2.5 star read this month was an anthology of 3 Christmassy queer tales, and that was called A Cozy Queer Christmas. Like I said, this one had 3 stories in it. The first one was a Cinderfella story. The second one had something to do with the main character meeting Santa and going on a little bit of a romantic adventure. And the third one had to do with a drag queen doing basically the same. These were fine. This anthology could have done with a little bit of editing because there were definitely some typos and also some name issues and that type of thing. But overall it wasn't terrible. I think I gave this a 2.5 because the stories were a little bit repetitive, like you knew where they were going. And if you're going to put 3 stories in an anthology, you might want to have a little bit more variety than 2 different protagonists getting in a car crash and that's how they meet their hottie. One of my 3-star reads, the first one being something I completely forgot that I actually read this month, and that was Darling Rose Gold. I read this at the very beginning of the month when I was in a completely different country on a completely different continent. At the time of requesting this from NetGalley, I didn't know anything about the Gypsy Rose Blanchard situation, and clearly she is now out of jail, which she shouldn't be in my opinion. That's my opinion. Don't come for me. All I knew about it at the time was it seemed like an interesting situation, and that's because this author directly took inspiration from that case and put it into this case, so we're getting this dual perspective between the mother and the daughter, and in this version of it, the mother is still alive, but she went to prison for the things she was doing to the daughter, and now she's out, and the situation is a little bit weird. Honestly, this sits on the spectrum of I would have changed more details and then it wouldn't feel so weird. And then I was gonna say, or just do a Gypsy Rose Blanchard book, but I don't think I want that. I will say that the writing kept me engaged and I wanted to know what was going to happen in this version of this story, but at the same time I had really weird feelings about the true crime aspect of this. Even though this itself is not true crime, this is fiction. Next we have A Different Hurricane. This is the one that's set on St. Vincent, which is a small island in the Caribbean, and this one has to do with this man who I believe is in his 60s, maybe his 70s at this point, and his wife passed away about a year ago. His daughter lives in Canada, but she's coming back for a trip soon, and he's been keeping a really big secret that he's hoping won't come out because of the very homophobic nature of where he lives, which is that he is queer. There are sections of this where he says that he's bisexual, and then the other characters are asking him if he's a bullshit bisexual, and I really hated that. So take with that what you will. But essentially this man grew up and he was dating a woman for a very, very long time because he needed a cover story, and he was also actually really dating his best friend, but once his girlfriend got pregnant, they decided they had to get married, even though he didn't want to do that and he didn't want the child to happen. But since the child was going to happen anyway, he wanted to be a really good father, and his boyfriend broke off their circumstance when the couple got married. However, this didn't mean that he didn't also have relationships with other men, which ended up with both him and his wife being HIV positive, which possibly contributed to her early death. So yeah, all of that is a lot. And it turns out that she wrote this kind of memoir, and it's not supposed to be opened for 25 years, but there's a chance that somebody is going to crack the code, get into it, and then all of his dirty secrets will be spilled. This one definitely has a very interesting premise, and I was interested while I was reading it, but it's also written in a way that isn't my favorite way, and there's no way for me to quantify it better than that. I'm really sorry, I wish I could, but like the writing style of it particularly didn't really resonate with me, and that's completely fine. Not everything has to be for me. Finally, for this category, we have Lucha and the Night Forest. This is something I picked up for the Queer Lit Readathon, and I did enjoy this story, although it was a little bit because magic at points, which I think is why it landed in the 3 stars for me. This is all about this girl who is trying to subsidize her family's living situation by doing this thing called hunting, because they live on this island nation and she has the ability to kind of fade into the background, attack these big, almost mythic proportion-sized creatures, and then get them out of the way of the government who needs to go into the forest and do things. However, in this world there's also this substance that many people find it hard not to keep using every time that they start using it, and it makes people forget, which means that her mother sometimes doesn't show up for work, and that becomes an issue because if her mother doesn't show up for work, they will get kicked out of their housing situation. That's the very beginning of this book, and then it goes from there because situations continually change throughout this book. Like I said earlier, this one does feel a little bit because magic at times, because it doesn't really delve into all of the details of why the magic happens and why the person having the magic has the magic and that type of thing. And I would have liked a little bit more of that, and I would have felt a little bit more comfortable. But that being said, I did really enjoy going on this adventure with these characters. On to my 3.5 star reads, the first one being Countess. This is a novella-length retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo, but in space. Our main character is a woman of color and the captain of this ship who has just come back into dock, and then she is framed for a crime that she didn't commit, so she is sent to prison, eventually escapes, and then comes back into society as somebody high in society and tries to exact revenge. I say this having never actually read The Count of Monte Cristo, or I don't think I've seen any movie adaptations because I'm sure they exist. This was kind of fun. I really enjoyed this, even though there were sections of it where the characters were just like in one specific place for a very long time. It still felt pretty quickly paced, which is hard to do, I imagine. And ultimately, I just kept reading and wanting to know what was going to happen because, like I said, I don't know the original story, so I don't know how closely this reflects the original story. But if it's branded as a retelling, I have to imagine it's pretty close, with the exception of the differences of being like in space and her being a queer woman and those types of things. So if you're like me and you don't really read classics, but you like reading retellings of classics, this is one to pick up. My other 3.5 star read this month was Dear Mothman, and this was my poetry read because this one is written in verse. This one is about a main character. I think his name was Lewis. It's been a little while since I read it, and I'm terrible at remembering main characters' names. But this main character is a trans boy, although he hasn't come out to his friends or his family yet, so they still constantly call him by a different name. And he is grieving the loss of his best friend who died about 4 months previously, who was also another little trans boy that nobody knew was a trans boy, so they're constantly calling him by a different name. Lewis might actually be the name of that best friend and not the main character. Like I said, I'm terrible at remembering names. They were meant to do the school science fair together, but they had talks of maybe splitting up because the best friend wanted to do this thing where he proved that Mothman actually exists, and our main character is like, I don't think we're going to be able to prove that, so I'm going to do something else. But now that his best friend is gone, he feels like he has to do this experiment, so he's constantly writing these letters to Mothman and leaving them outside, hoping that Mothman is reading them and asking things like, I hope I can interview you, or if you could just like write back to me, that would be really great because I would really like to do this project specifically for my best friend. This is a really endearing and heartbreaking story, and I found it really interesting. Like, what an interesting way to see a person going through this type of grief, and what an interesting way for this person to try to process that type of grief. Like I said, it was heartbreaking, but I also really enjoyed it. which every time I say something like that, I'm like, am I a monster? But I think you know what I mean. Speaking of monsters, on to my 4-star reads. The first one was M is for Monster. This is a graphic novel that I read in the Narita airport in Tokyo. This one is also sort of a retelling of the Frankenstein story, except for many of the situations are very, very different. Our Frankenstein creature is made out of mostly pieces of this person who passed, and the scientist that brought this person back to life is the sister of that person, hoping they've brought back their sister. However, when the creature wakes up, they're definitely not the sister. However, knowing that the scientist will just take them apart and try to put them back together again to achieve the sister, they don't really want the scientist to know that they're not the sister, so they kind of have to fake it a little bit, which they do a little bit with the help of the spirit of the sister who is kicking around, but strangely not in a way where the sister can actually talk to the scientist's sister, because they were both scientists. Again, I really wish I remembered names because it would make this way clearer. The monster does eventually go by M, which is the first initial of the sister who died though, so that is helpful, but I can't remember anything other than that. This one, again, obviously has to do with grief, but it also has to do with personhood and not knowing where you come from and being in this very bizarre circumstance where you're supposed to be doing things that are like very sciencey, but that's not actually what you're interested in. You'd actually really like to learn how to sew, for example. This one is also queer, and we have a delightful non-binary side character who I believe is married to the scientist trying to bring back her sister. Another graphic novel I read this month specifically for the Queer Lit Readathon was The Sea in You. This one has to do with mermaids, which I decided was my choose your own prompt for the Queer Lit Readathon. One day this girl is on the beach and she's just cleaning things up and she gets attacked by a mermaid, but then doesn't get drowned or killed or anything by that mermaid, and they actually decide to become friends, which is very, very rare. However, there's many different dynamics to this circumstance. Firstly, there's a little bit of a language barrier, so they kind of have to teach each other how to understand things from each other's world. Also, our main character has this boyfriend who is very controlling, and that definitely comes back up, and this friendship maybe seems a little bit more than a friendship eventually. This was a really quick read for me because I just really wanted to know where it was going, and the art was beautiful, and if this author has done anything else, I really want to read it. Next, in a completely different vein, we have a book called A Murder in Hollywood. This is all about a very famous murder that happened in Hollywood, I believe in the 50s, maybe the 60s. This spans so much time that I can't remember exactly when the murder itself took place because we kind of see the murder and then we go back to the beginning of somebody's life. However, it's a very famous murder that I had personally never heard of, so I was interested to go into it, and this was filled with people I've heard of before. For example, I think I've heard the name Lana Turner before, who is very pivotal to this story because the person who was murdered is found in her bedroom, so that was a situation. But then it'll bring up people like Joan Crawford, another name I know, but I don't think I've ever actually watched a Joan Crawford movie. This one starts at the murder scene with somebody saying, call this certain lawyer, and then we kind of Tarantino it back to the beginning of Lana Turner's life, and we learn about how her dad was actually murdered, how Lana Turner's not her name because a lot of people in Hollywood end up changing their names because the studios just tell them they have to, her tumultuous relationship with various different gentlemen callers, and then eventually the guy that she ended up seeing at this point and how he had ties to the mob, so him being dead on her bedroom floor is definitely a problem. This one was interesting and I really enjoyed the writing in this one, and it was very easy to digest in these little bits over the Christmas holiday week because I always have a book that I listen to every week, but obviously this was a very busy week and I was glad to actually be able to get all the way through this. Next we have The Big Reveal, an illustrated manifesto of drag by Sasha Velour. Sasha is a drag queen that you might know from RuPaul's Drag Race. She actually won her season, and as soon as I heard The Big Reveal, I was like, I know exactly why you've titled it this way, because she is known for a very big reveal from the finale of her season of Drag Race. But I'm quite certain that they also like to do reveals anyway, because this does delve into a little bit of their backstory, their childhood, as well as talking about drag in general in different cultures. It's just a fun time because you're seeing all these different points to do with drag, which is a topic that I find endlessly interesting. Next, we have The Do's and Donuts of Love. This one is set in Ireland and it has to do with this main character named Shireen. See, I remembered a main character name. And she recently broke up with her girlfriend, which is something that she's just kind of moping over, especially because her best friend is actually in Bangladesh on a family trip, so she's not even in person being able to comfort her or anything like that, when she gets an email telling her that she's actually been chosen to be on a television program which I believe was called the Junior Irish Baking Show. And it's exactly what it sounds like. teenagers from Ireland on a baking show, kind of like the Great British Bake Off or those types of shows. She's really excited about this because she thinks it's going to bring a lot of eyes to her family business, which is a donut shop in Dublin called You Drive Me Glazy, and they could use those eyes on their business because it's been a little bit slow recently. However, when she gets there, her ex-girlfriend is also a contestant, and there's this other girl that's catching her eye. This actually went in a direction that I did not expect whatsoever, but then we also get all of these baking things and all of the talking about how it's very different to be a contestant of color on a television program like this, and how people are just unhinged about it. Also, as I've probably mentioned many times before, I used to live in Dublin for a year, so anytime I can read a book set somewhere where I've been for a significant period of time, I always get really excited because I'm like, ooh, are they going to go to locations I've been before and that type of thing? And yes, of course, they went to a couple of them. Speaking of locations I've been before, I also read a book called Newcomer. This one is the second in the Detective Kaga series, and this one is set in Tokyo. I believe I was actually listening to this on the train out of Tokyo on our trip, if I'm remembering correctly. However, I don't know if I ever stepped foot in the specific subdivision of Tokyo that this was in. I honestly can't remember. This one is told in a really interesting way because he's constantly going out and interviewing people to do with this murder, as he would, because that's his job, but he's also solving all of these other little things along the way. So, for example, they looked at the crime scene and they went, well, there's this box of sweets at the crime scene, but one of those sweets has wasabi in it. What's with that? Where did these sweets come from? And it turns out these sweets had nothing to do with the murder, but he also solves that little mystery along the way. And he does that with several different things. And the way it's told is not exactly linear, so he'll be talking about one thing and you'll know he's solved this other thing, but he'll be talking about, oh yeah, I need to go interview this person for this thing you already know he's solved because it's kind of out of order, which was just really, really interesting. This is the second in the series that I've read, and I've really enjoyed both of them, and I'm interested to see what else happens to this detective. Also, I believe that there are books that happen before this series, and I think if I'm reading the situation correctly, they must be books from before he became a detective, but he was still doing these types of things, if I had to guess. I don't actually know, I haven't looked into it. However, these books are great. On to my 4.5 star books, the first one being None of This Is True. This one is primarily about two women who happen to have the same birthday on the same birth year who were born in the same hospital. And they find this out on each of their mutual 45th birthday when they happen to be in the same pub celebrating. We see both of their perspectives. One of them is Alex, and she is a podcaster. She has a husband and kids and a nice house and all of these great things. And then the other character, who I feel like is the more important character and whose name I don't remember for whatever reason, because again, I'm bad at names, she has a very different life story. She actually got married very, very young to a man who was very much older than her. She also has kids, but her kids have grown up. One of those kids they haven't seen in a really long time, and the other one is an adult who never leaves her bedroom. The non-podcaster actually approaches Alex in the loos and is like, hi, I'm your birthday twin. And they decide to make a podcast out of that because she comes to her and says, I know that you make stories about women who have done amazing things, and I haven't yet, but I feel like I'm just on the precipice of completely changing my own life. Let me tell you about my life, where I started dating my current husband when I was 14 and he was 27 years older, and we didn't actually come out as a couple until I was 18 when I moved in with him, and it goes from there. However, you know the name of this book is None of This Is True, so you don't really know how much of her story is actually the truth. So Alex embarks on this adventure of not only interviewing her, but trying to interview other people in her life to try to figure out this full story, and by the end of it, some people are dead. This one was truly interesting. I kept listening and listening and listening and just wanting to know what was going to happen. I was very engaged by this story. Next we have Stars in Their Eyes, which is another graphic novel that I read, I believe, on the way back from Tokyo. And this one was delightful because I think I picked it up on a complete whim, and the main character on the cover is actually wearing a t-shirt that was designed by a friend of mine, and then the dedication was also to that same friend of mine, so that was just weird to see in the wild. This is actually something that's happened with this specific friend like 3 or 4 times before. I'll see their name in dedications and stuff and I'll be like, oh, that's great. I love having internet friends that do really cool things. In any case, this one takes place in Australia, and it's about a mother and daughter going to their first nerdy convention, and it basically takes place over about a day, where the daughter actually finds this new non-binary friend, and maybe they're going to be a little bit more than friends, but they also live really far away from each other, and it's all about queerness and nerdiness and nerd culture, and it's just a delight. Next we have All the Right Notes. This is about a guy who who works as a pianist in New York, and this one is told in the past and the present because we'll be talking about his real life where he's got a boyfriend and he's working in a piano bar, and sometimes he works on Broadway as like a substitute pianist and that type of thing. But then also we'll talk about his time in high school when he had this friend who he really was attracted to, but he didn't think this friend would be interested in him at all because he was popular and he could also sing, and it's just one of those people who's just ridiculously talented and it's super unfair. And it turns out in the current timeline, he is also a movie star, which of course he is. As it turns out, our main character's dad was actually the choir director in their high school, and he's retiring, and he's like, what would be great is if you and the movie star could come back and like be at the final concert, which means that he now has to talk to the movie star who he hasn't talked to since college for a reason we don't know until we get to that specific flashback. So as it turns out, that movie star is actually in New York. He's going to be hosting Saturday Night Live, so he shows up and just tries to be like, so can you do this thing for my dad? And it goes from there. This one was so engaging. I really enjoyed getting to know these characters, not only through music and art and that type of thing, but also through food. Because the love interest's father was from Tokyo, so he actually brought them some soju at one point, which I thought was great because I had literally just had some soju in Tokyo. I had no idea that this book had anything to do with anyone who had ever been to Japan, so that was fun to read it in Japan and just magically see that on the page. But then our main character's parents, I believe, were both from Korea, so we got a lot of that type of food descriptions, and everything sounded really good. It was also full of meat, which I could not eat, but like, it sounded really good. It's also just a story of these people reconnecting and us figuring out what happened in their past that broke them apart and how they reacted, and it's just lovely. Back on the nonfiction train, we have Real Queer America, LGBT stories from red states. This one is about this trans woman who decides that she's going to go on a cross-country trip to these different locations in red states where queer people also exist and they want to exist there. Unbeknownst to the popular narrative of like, if you're queer, you can just move to either of the coasts and it'll be fine, not everybody wants to do that. I believe this road trip took place in 2016, possibly 2017, if I'm remembering correctly, and this book came out around 2019. So obviously this had to do with things that were happening around the time of the 45th president's first time in office. It hurts me to say that, but here we are. And it really had to do with queer community and finding all of these little pockets of community in places that other people typically like to think don't exist for whatever reason. As this book points out, America is a deeply queer nation, and I can only hope for okay things to be happening over the next 4 years. On to my 5-star reads, the first one being This Summer Will Be Different. This one is told over about 5 different summers, and it's about this woman who lives in Toronto. She owns a plant shop. Her parents think that she should be doing something more important with her life, whatever the heck that means. And at some point, about 5 years ago, her best friend is like, you need a little bit of time off. We're gonna go back to my home, which happens to be on Prince Edward Island, which, if you're not aware of Canadian geography, it's on the east coast. It's the smallest province. It is also literally an island, and you can fly into it, or you can also take a bridge onto it that is about 11 kilometers long. I've never actually flown into PEI, but I have taken the bridge a few times. However, on the day that she lands in PEI, her best friend actually missed the flight, so now she's in PEI by herself for the first night. They're gonna meet up afterwards. That's completely fine, whatever. So she goes to get some oysters, and there's this really hot bartender, and she ends up going home with the really hot bartender. And then the next morning, she's kind of like, okay, well, I gotta go pick up my best friend, and then we're gonna go to this place that's like at this address to stay because that's her family house. And the guy's like, are you sure that's the address? Because that's where you currently are. As it turns out, this is her best friend's younger brother, and as it turns out, there were like 3 rules for this trip. One of them is you have to eat your weight in seafood. The second one, I can't remember, but the third one is don't fall in love with my brother. So they have to keep this situation hush-hush, be like, this never happened, we've never met before. And the thing is, she keeps getting invited to come back for summers on PEI, and things just keep happening, but they shouldn't keep happening, and it goes from there. I obviously really enjoyed this one because it's in my 5 stars. I really enjoyed just seeing these people trying not to fall in love, but being in love, but are they really in love, and whose feelings are doing what now, and it's just delightful. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed all the side characters too. They had a lot of personality, and it was just delightful. It's delightful. Penultimately on this list, we have the final book that I read this year, which, if you want to know, I read 180 books this year, and that was The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year. This one is about this mystery author. She writes cozy mysteries, and she has had a life that is just real tragic at points. For example, as a kid, she always wanted to love Christmas. She did love Christmas. She always wanted to have extended family and big events. However, unfortunately, she was an only child and her parents were only children, so they really didn't have any family. And then when she was 18, her parents actually unfortunately passed away in an accident. So she was in this circumstance where she couldn't stay in the dorms over the Christmas holiday, but she also didn't have a home to go back to because her parents had literally just died. And this girl in her dorms is like, come home with me. And this woman ends up being her best friend, and she introduces her to this guy that she's always been friends with, and things go from there. And eventually it's 12 years later and she is divorced from that guy because that guy was in bed with her best friend. He also took half her royalties, and also he seemed to be from old money or whatever, but he had no money left, so he basically took half her money, half her royalties for her books, which she decided that she needed to pay out. And yeah, she's just been living alone, writing all these books so she can afford to buy off the royalties so he doesn't keep siphoning off all her money. And at the beginning of the book, she has been duped into going to a holiday party, which she does not appreciate. When she's there, however, her publisher is like, you're going to want to read this envelope because you've been invited to your biggest fan's place, and you're gonna fly there and you're gonna spend Christmas with this person. And she's like, that sounds terrible. Who even is this person? I don't want to go. But then she overhears something at the holiday party and decides, whatever, I'm gonna do it. So she goes, but then she's not alone because this guy she can't stand is, for whatever reason, also going to the same location. So she has to spend Christmas with him too. What happens from there is a series of shenanigans of epic proportion when it comes to just the mystery thriller genre. Because a few days short of Christmas, there's a locked room mystery that happens and she wants to solve it, and also they're all snowed in on this giant estate and she simply has to get to the bottom of it. We also get a little bit of his perspective on things, and his life has not been as bright and shiny as she's always assumed just based on how she's seen him over the past 5 years. This was an absolutely perfect holiday read. Finally, my favorite book of the month, something I absolutely could not put down, was Compound Fracture. This, I think, is my favorite book by this author, and I've read 3 so far. This one is about a queer trans teen in the Appalachians who is just about to come out as trans to his parents, and on the same night is going to meet up with an old friend of his because he has some information that could maybe take down the local sheriff, who is crooked and whose family has had a rivalry with his family for the past 100 years or so. However, on the way home, he is nearly murdered by the sheriff's son and his cronies, and then is kind of blackmailed into staying quiet about it. And this one is incredibly bloody and filled with revenge, and just has to do with a bunch of things to do with this family history, and I could not put it down. It was so well written, it was so fast paced, I wanted to know what was going to happen, and it went some very dark ways. Do yourself a favor if you're able to read gory content, and definitely pick up this book. 8 of the books I just talked about were reads I picked up specifically for the Queerlit Readathon, and with those 8 books I was able to completely black out the bingo board for round 14, so yay, I did it! Round of applause. I think I've done it almost every round. I think there might have been one round where I missed a prompt, but I did it! Also, if you're interested in knowing the dates for the 2025 rounds, I will link that video down below. As for my bookish bingo board from hell, I didn't have any bingos the last time we talked about it, and now I have 2 bingos. So let's look at the board. I didn't do as great as I could have done on the Book of the Month books, and I've actually carried forward reading more of those books to my 2025 bingo board from hell. If you haven't seen that video, I'll also link that down below, because in that video I go through all of the challenges I've set myself for 2025. I wasn't able to cross off that one or the second challenge, which was TBR Veterans, which is just books I've had on my TBR in my possession for ages and just haven't gotten around to, and I didn't do a very good job. I was also out of the country for like approximately 4 months, so that didn't help. However, I was able to get myself just up to that 10 mark for the ignored arcs, so I was able to cross that off at the last moment. I've already crossed off the 400 plus page thing twice, and I didn't actually add to it this month. Most importantly, I was finally able to read a book based on a random emoji. That random emoji looked like this. I believe it was sent from my friend Anna, and I didn't know what this emoji was supposed to be. I was like, is this some kind of weather related thing? And it turns out I think it's supposed to be a cyclone, but based on this emoji, I picked up the book A Different Hurricane, which actually comes out early next year. This was an advanced copy from the publishers, so thank you to them. And I was able to cross this off. I don't know why it took me all year to do that, and if you have any emojis you want me to read for next year, please let me know either here or on that video, which again I've linked down below. I also had already checked off the pre-2000s square, so nothing changed on that one, as well as the non-English speaking country square, which is me trying to say I'm reading internationally translated books. So not translated books that come from Canada, because we do have a second language and I am not good at it, which is why I would have to read translated books. My 40 before 40 reads was also checked off before this month, so I didn't add anything to that, and I also didn't add anything to the last square on the bingo board. But I have a diagonal bingo and I have a horizontal bingo, and I am very pleased with that because I thought I was gonna have 0 bingos. So the really big question is, what do I do now that I know I had 2 bingos? I was supposed to come up with something that would be my prize, but I didn't actually do that. So if you have any suggestions for my prize for my bingos, please let me know down below. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. I've talked about over 1,500 books on that playlist, so like, maybe check it out sometime. If you've read any of these or you now want to read any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon in 2025. Bye! I mean, there's a good chance this is coming out on the first day of 2025, but you know what I mean. I'll see you more in 2025. Bye.